Have you ever looked at a pair of high heels and assumed they were designed to make women look taller or more elegant? It feels obvious. The shape, the posture, the way they change how someone walks. Everything about them seems built for that purpose. But that assumption quietly ignores something strange. High heels were never created for women in the first place. They were created to make statements, solve problems, and advance fashion, not as symbols of femininity. But the flip in it is what we shall uncover today, at Simple History of Things. At first glance, heels look decorative. Elevated, narrow, almost fragile. But the original versions weren't built for style. They were built for control. The earliest known use of heeled footwear traces back to horse riders, particularly Persian cavalry. When you're riding at speed, stability matters. You're not just sitting on a horse, you're standing, balancing, shifting your weight while controlling movement and sometimes even firing weapons. A flat shoe can slide through a stirrup too easily. But a raised heel creates a stopping point. It locks your foot in place. That small lift at the back wasn't about appearance. It was a functional anchor. And once you see it that way, the shape of a heel starts to make more sense. It's not just lifting the body, it's positioning it. It changes how weight is distributed, how balance is maintained. For a rider, that meant more control, more precision, more effectiveness in motion. But here's where things start to shift. This practical riding tool didn't stay on the battlefield. It moved upward into status. As trade routes expanded, Persian culture began influencing parts of Europe. And with it came fashion elements tied to power and prestige. European aristocrats didn't just adopt foreign styles, they exaggerated them. What started as a functional heel became something else entirely, a signal. Because wearing heels began to say something very specific. I don't walk. If you think about it, heels make everyday movement harder. They're not built for long distances. They slow you down. They limit how comfortably you can stand or run. And that's exactly the point. Only someone who didn't need to work, travel on foot, or move quickly could afford to wear them. So heels became associated with wealth. But more than that, they became associated with dominance. Take Louis XIV, for example. He didn't just wear heels, he turned them into a symbol of authority. Bright red heels, specifically. Reserved only for those within his inner circle. Not because they were comfortable, but because they were visible. They changed posture. Forced the chest forward. Tilted the body slightly. Created a stance that looked controlled, deliberate, elevated, literally and socially. And suddenly, heels weren't just footwear. They were a statement. But here's the twist most people don't expect. At this point in history, heels were still very much a male item. Men wore them to project power. To signal status. To separate themselves from the ordinary. Women, at the time, weren't the primary wearers of heels in elite circles, men were. So what changed? Why did something tied so strongly to masculinity flip completely? The answer isn't a single moment. It's a slow shift in perception. As fashion evolved through the 17th and 18th centuries, clothing began to divide more sharply along gender lines. Men's fashion gradually moved toward practicality and restraint. Simpler shapes. Darker colors. Less ornamentation. Women's fashion moved in the opposite direction, more elaborate, more decorative, more expressive. And heels followed that split. What had once been a shared symbol started drifting. Men began abandoning heels because they conflicted with a new identity forming around masculinity, one tied to function, seriousness, and utility. Heels, with their exaggerated form and impracticality, started to feel excessive. Meanwhile, those same qualities made them more attractive in women's fashion. Because heels didn't just elevate height, they reshaped movement. They altered posture, changed the angle of the foot, adjusted how weight is carried. Walking in heels isn't the same as walking normally. It becomes more deliberate. Slower. Controlled in a different way. That transformation of movement became part of their appeal. But here's something most people don't consciously notice. Heels don't just change how someone looks. They change how someone is perceived. Height increases slightly. The body leans forward. Steps become more measured. All of this creates an impression not just of elevation, but of presence. And that perception became tied to femininity over time. Not because of the original design, but because of how the design was reinterpreted. This is where the hidden cause starts to reveal itself. Heels didn't become feminine because they were designed that way. They became feminine because society reassigned their meaning. The exact same object, same structure, same function was given a completely different identity. And once that shift happened, it stuck. By the 19th century, heels were almost entirely absent from men's fashion. What had once been a symbol of masculine power quietly disappeared from that space. Meanwhile, in women's fashion, heels evolved further, becoming higher, narrower, more stylized. The function faded. The symbolism remained. But something interesting never fully went away. Even today, the physical effects of heels still mirror their original purpose. They still control posture. They still influence balance. They still change how movement is executed. The difference is how we interpret those effects. What was once about stability in motion became about shaping appearance. What was once about control in combat became about control in presentation. And that raises a strange question. If the original purpose of heels was practical, and the modern purpose is symbolic, what are we really looking at when we see them? Because they're not just fashion. They're a leftover system. A design built for one world, carried into another, and given a completely new meaning. And once you realize that, it's hard to look at them the same way again. If that shift surprised you, drop a like or tell me what everyday item you've always misunderstood. We might break it down next. What makes this story stick isn't just that heels started with men. It's how completely their identity flipped. Same object. Same structure. Completely different meaning. That kind of transformation doesn't happen by accident. It happens when function becomes invisible, and perception takes over. Heels didn't change. The story around them did. And once that story changed, it reshaped how generations understood something they saw every day. So the next time you see a pair of high heels, it's worth remembering you're not just looking at fashion. You're looking at a design that once kept soldiers steady in motion, then signaled power in royal courts, and now carries an entirely different meaning. Same object. Different world. If you enjoy uncovering the hidden logic behind everyday things, this is exactly what we do here. Subscribe and stay with Simple History of Things, because the things you see every day are rarely what they seem.